They say you never see it coming. That's a lie. Looking back, I should have known. The late nights at work. The sudden change in her perfume. The way her phone was always face down. The guarded way she spoke about certain things. But I ignored the signs. I trusted her. I believed in the life we had built together. That illusion shattered on a cold January night. It was one of those rare evenings when my boss, Isabella Reed, let me off early. The garage had been busy with high-end clients all week, and I was exhausted. But tonight, Isabella looked at me and said, "Go home, Eric. Surprise your wife." So I did. On the way home, I stopped at Maddie's favorite wine shop. I stood in the aisle for a minute, debating whether I should pick up flowers, but in the end, I settled on a bottle of red wine and some takeout from the Italian place she loved. Nothing extravagant, just a small reminder that I was thinking of her. When I pulled into the driveway, I immediately sensed something was off. The house was dark. That didn't make sense. Maddie always left a light on when she was home, even if she was just in another room. Maybe she was in the shower, or maybe she had stepped out. But then my eyes landed on a black BMW parked across the street. A car that didn't belong in our quiet neighborhood. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. I told myself I was overreacting, that there was a logical explanation, but my hands still felt clammy as I stepped out of my truck. I approached the door quietly, almost too quietly, as if my body already knew something my mind hadn't accepted yet. I pushed inside, expecting the familiar warmth of home. Instead, I was met with silence. And then, after a few seconds, I heard it. Laughter. Not just any laughter. Hers. Maddie's voice, mixed with a deeper, masculine chuckle. Upstairs. In our bedroom. For a second, I couldn't move. The sound felt like a knife being slowly twisted into my gut. I wanted to turn around, to walk out and pretend I hadn't heard it. But some sick, masochistic part of me needed to see it for myself. I climbed the stairs one by one, heart hammering against my ribs. The door to our room was half open. And then I saw them. Maddie. Her bare shoulders peeking out from under our sheets. Her golden hair tousled, her body tangled with him. Dr. Julian Carter. I recognized him instantly. The charming, well-dressed surgeon from Westwood Private Clinic. The same man Maddie had introduced me to once at a hospital fundraiser. I remembered shaking his hand, feeling something off about him, but brushing it aside. Now I knew why. I must have made a sound because Maddie's head snapped toward the door. Her eyes widened in shock. But Julian? He just smirked. Smirked. Well, he said, stretching lazily. That was sooner than expected. Maddie yanked the covers up over herself, scrambling for words. Eric. I stepped inside, gripping the bottle of wine so hard I thought it might shatter. You want to explain this? My voice was calm, too calm. Julian didn't move. Didn't even bother to act embarrassed. He leaned back against the pillows, watching me like I was some kind of amusing inconvenience. Maddie swallowed hard. She didn't look guilty. She looked caught. And then she said the words that broke me. Eric. I love him. I went completely still. My body locked up as if I had been hit by a truck. What? Her voice wavered. Julian and I, we've been together for 4 years. 4 years. The words barely registered at first. It was like she was speaking another language. Then it hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I let out a laugh, hollow, humorless, disbelieving. For years. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to tell you. I did. But you wouldn't understand. I let out a breath, shaking my head. You wanted to tell me? When, Maddie? Before or after you drained our savings? Her face paled. That's when I saw them. The suitcases. Lined up neatly by the closet. Packed. Ready to go. That's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some heat-of-the-moment decision. This had been planned. Carefully. Julian swung his legs off the bed and stood up slowly, rolling his shoulders like he had all the time in the world. Let's be adults about this, he said smoothly. Madeline has made her choice. She's moving on to something better. Something better. I snapped. Before I could stop myself, I swung the wine bottle. It shattered against the nightstand instead of a skull, red liquid splattering across the room. Maddie gasped. But Julian? Julian just laughed. See, he said to her, wiping at a stray drop of wine on his sleeve. This is exactly what I meant. You deserve better than this brute. My entire body was shaking, but I turned to Maddie, forcing the words out. If you walk out that door with him, Maddie, we're done. No coming back. No second chances. She hesitated. For 1 second, just one, I thought maybe she would reconsider. But then she squared her shoulders, grabbed her purse, and walked out. Julian smirked, buttoned up his shirt, and followed her. Just like that, they were gone. I stood in the silence of our bedroom, staring at the wreckage of my life. The sheets on the bed still smelled like her perfume. My hands trembled as I wiped at my face. I was supposed to be angry, furious, but all I felt was empty. That night, I found a bottle of whiskey in the kitchen, sat on the floor, and drank until everything blurred. But even when the alcohol numbed my senses, one thought remained crystal clear. This isn't over. The house felt hollow without her. Every room carried echoes of a life I thought was real, now just empty space filled with ghosts. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Maddie in our bed, Julian smirking like he had already won. The betrayal played on repeat in my mind, twisting deeper with each cycle. By morning, the anger had settled into something colder. A quiet, calculated rage. I wanted to scream, break something, but I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the worn-out wood, running my fingers over the tiny scratches Maddie had left when she used to drum her nails while drinking coffee. She was gone. I checked our joint bank account, half hoping I was wrong. $50,000. Gone. Taken the day before she left. My stomach twisted. I had worked for years, putting away every spare dollar for our future. Our future. The house we had dreamed of, the life we were supposed to build. Turns out, she had been building her own future all along. My fingers curled into fists as I stared at the empty account. She thought she could walk away clean. She thought she could erase me, move on without consequences. She was wrong. The days passed in a fog. I went to work, fixed cars, came home. The motions felt automatic. I barely spoke, barely existed. At Big West Auto, my boss Isabella Reed noticed. She was tough, but she wasn't heartless. "You look like hell, Eric," she said, crossing her arms. "What's going on?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. What was I supposed to say? That my wife had left me? That she had taken everything? That I felt like a hollow shell of a man? "I'm fine," I muttered. She didn't buy it. Fine men don't look like they've gone 3 rounds with life and lost every single one. She sighed. "Look, I don't know what's happening, but if you need time." I don't. A lie. But what was time going to fix? Maddie wasn't coming back. "All right," she said. "But get your head on straight, Lawson. You've got 4 weeks to prove to me you still belong here. If things don't improve, you're out." I nodded and got back to work. That night, I sat in the dark with a bottle of whiskey, replaying every moment of our relationship, looking for the cracks I had missed. When had she stopped loving me? Had she ever truly loved me at all? At some point, I passed out on the couch. When I woke up the next morning, my head pounding, a realization cut through the haze. It didn't matter when it started. What mattered was that she thought she could get away with it. She thought she could leave me behind, take my money, my dignity, and start fresh with Julian. She thought I'd accept it. She was dead wrong. I started asking around. Quietly at first. People in town loved gossip, especially when it wasn't about them. Turns out, Maddie and Julian weren't even subtle. "I figured you knew," one of the guys at the bar said when I pressed him. Hell, half the hospital staff knew. Julian used to take her to that fancy steakhouse on Willow Street. They weren't exactly hiding it. Half the town knew. I had been the last to find out. Every whispered conversation, every sympathetic look suddenly made sense. People had been laughing at me. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the rage burning my throat. I wasn't just some fool they could walk all over. I needed a plan. I started small. I went back through every bank statement, every expense. I retraced Maddie's steps, looking at where our money had gone. And I found it. She hadn't just taken the $50,000. She had been siphoning money for over a year. Little amounts. 100 here, 200 there. Withdrawals made just under the daily limit, so I wouldn't notice. She was funding their new life before she even left me. I sat there, staring at the numbers, my hands shaking. I had been working extra shifts, saving, planning for what? So she could drink expensive wine with Julian in some penthouse while I was left with nothing? No. If Maddie and Julian thought they could move on without consequences, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I needed help. That's where Ryan Caldwell came in. Ryan had been my best friend since high school, but life had taken us in different directions. He became a therapist, one of those guys who believed in healing and moving forward. I wasn't looking to move forward. I was looking for leverage. We met up at a small diner on the edge of town. I told him everything. He listened, frowning as I laid it all out. The affair, the stolen money, the way everyone knew except me. When I was done, he sighed. Eric, you know revenge isn't going to fix this, right? I gave him a tight smile. That's the thing, Ryan. I'm not looking to fix anything. He hesitated. What do you want from me? You still have contacts at the hospital, right? I leaned forward. I need dirt on Julian. Anything they've tried to bury. Lawsuits, malpractice claims, backroom deals. Whatever I can use to ruin him. Ryan exhaled, shaking his head. Jesus, Eric. This isn't you. Maybe not, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. But it is now. That night, I got a call from Ryan. You're not gonna like this, he said. Julian's been under investigation before. Nothing public, but there were rumors of fraud. Money laundering, stolen meds, prescribing unnecessary treatments for cash. My grip tightened around my phone. Jackpot. Can you get proof? I asked. Ryan hesitated. Maybe, but you're playing a dangerous game, man. I looked around my empty house, at the cold bed where Maddie used to sleep, at the empty bank account that should have been our future. I had nothing left to lose. Give me what you can, I said. Because this is just the beginning. I didn't want justice. I wanted destruction. I wanted Julian ruined. I wanted Maddie to regret everything. And most of all, I wanted them to feel what I felt. The game had begun, and I was about to change the rules. I sat in my truck outside Ryan's office, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The weight of what I was about to do pressed against my chest, but I didn't hesitate. I had spent years playing the good guy, the trusting husband, the hard-working man who kept his head down and believed in fairness. Look where that had gotten me. Ryan's voice echoed in my head. This isn't you, Eric. He was right. This wasn't me. But maybe it was time to change. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel as I headed toward the diner where we always met. Ryan was already inside, sipping black coffee, his expression tight. He knew why I had called him. I got what you wanted, he said before I even sat down. I leaned forward. Tell me. Ryan exhaled, shaking his head. Julian's name has come up in multiple internal investigations. There's a pattern: patients being billed for treatments they never received, unnecessary surgeries, falsified insurance claims. I didn't even blink. You got proof? Ryan slid a flash drive across the table. Enough to bury him. I pocketed it. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Ryan watched me carefully. What are you planning to do with it? I met his gaze. Make sure Julian never practices medicine again. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Eric, revenge isn't going to fix what she did to you. I gave him a tight smile. Maybe not, but it'll make me feel a hell of a lot better. Ryan didn't argue. He knew I wasn't looking for approval. I finished my coffee, stood up, and left without another word. The game had officially begun. The next step was easy. I waited until Julian left his clinic late that evening, slipping into his office through a side entrance. Ryan's contact had given me a temporary login to the hospital's internal system, enough time to upload the evidence straight to the medical board. Fraud, malpractice, insurance scams. I didn't even have to fabricate anything. Julian had already built his own noose. By the time I was done, the system had queued automated alerts to the right authorities. Within 48 hours, his career would be in flames. I made sure to delete my tracks before I left, locking the door behind me. One move down. 1,000 more to go. I wanted to see the fallout. The next morning, I sat in my truck outside the clinic, watching through the glass windows. At exactly 8:15 a.m., 3 men in suits entered, hospital administrators, judging by the tension in the air. Minutes later, Julian stormed out of the building, his face pale with barely contained rage. His phone was pressed to his ear, and even from where I sat, I could tell he was shouting. Panic. I smiled. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know exactly what was happening. His license was under review. Investigators would be swarming his office within the day. I wondered if he had any idea who had set him up. Would he suspect Maddie? Would he think one of his colleagues had finally ratted him out? I didn't care. I started the engine and drove away. Destroying Julian wasn't enough. Maddie needed to feel it too. I followed her routine for 2 days. Not because I missed her. Because I needed to know where to strike. She still worked at the hospital. Still walked into that building every morning with her head held high, like she hadn't torn my life apart. I wondered if she knew what was coming for her. When I checked our bank account again, I noticed something interesting. Her money was still there. Julian had been financing their new life, but now that his career was about to implode, I doubted he'd have much left to give her. It was time to tighten the noose. I needed someone who could crack financial accounts wide open. That's where Cypher came in. Cypher wasn't his real name, obviously. He was a guy I met years ago when I worked on underground streetcars. He could break into any system, reroute money, erase debts, fabricate digital paper trails. I called him up, and we met in a parking lot just outside the city. "You really want to do this?" Cypher asked, eyeing me as he leaned against his motorcycle. "This isn't just screwing with a guy's car or slashing tires. You're burning their lives down." I didn't blink. "Yeah, and I need it done right." He smirked. "All right. What's the target?" "Madeline Lawson and Julian Carter. I need their accounts drained. If possible, I want their names linked to fraud." Cypher whistled. "Damn. You don't play small, do you?" I handed him a USB. "Everything you need is on there." He took it, slipping it into his jacket pocket. "Give me a week." I nodded and walked away. The wheels were in motion. A week later, the first cracks appeared. I sat back with a drink in hand as I watched the news feed explode with reports of Julian's financial accounts being frozen. Allegations of fraudulent transactions surfaced. Money laundering. Even tax evasion. The hospital terminated his contract immediately. He was done. But it wasn't over yet. That night, Cypher called me. "Check your ex's bank account," he said, his voice smug. I pulled up the app. Zero balance. Every cent Maddie had stolen from me, gone. The money had been rerouted, buried in accounts that didn't exist. She'd never see it again. Cypher laughed. "Oh, and one more thing. She's now under an IRS audit. Have fun with that." I hung up, staring at the screen. She had nothing left. Julian had nothing left. I could picture them now, panicking, screaming, trying to figure out what went wrong. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. But I wasn't done yet. I ran into Maddie a few days later. She was outside a bank, pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair tied back in a messy bun. The expensive clothes she used to wear were replaced by something simpler. She didn't see me at first. Then she turned. Our eyes met. I saw it. The fear. The desperation. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "Save it," I said. "Eric, I shook my head. "You made your choice, Maddie. Now live with it." Her face crumpled. "You don't understand. Everything's gone. Julian, don't care." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You thought you could take everything from me and walk away untouched? That's not how life works, sweetheart." Her lower lip trembled. "Please." I tilted my head. "Please what?" She swallowed hard. "I don't have anywhere to go." I smiled. "Not my problem." And I walked away. I had destroyed them. But as I got into my truck and pulled away, a strange emptiness settled in my chest. I had won. So why didn't I feel better? I shook off the thought. There was one more move to make. And this time, it wouldn't just ruin their lives. It would erase them completely. I should have felt like I had one. I had taken everything from them, Julian's career, Maddie's security, their future together. I had destroyed them piece by piece, just as they had destroyed me. But instead of satisfaction, I felt nothing. I sat in my truck outside my house, staring at the empty driveway, the dark windows. It still felt like she could walk through that door at any moment, like nothing had changed. But it had. Maddie was gone. And even though I had wanted this, had fought for this revenge with everything I had, it still didn't bring me peace. Maybe Ryan had been right. Maybe revenge doesn't fix anything. I sighed and rubbed a hand down my face. I needed to move on. But there was one last thing I had to do. Julian had started drinking. I knew because Cypher had been tracking his credit card transactions, liquor stores, bars, late-night purchases at gas stations. The man who had once walked around like he was untouchable was crumbling. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. But then I remembered the smirk on his face that night in my bedroom. I remembered the way he spoke to me, like I was beneath him. No, I didn't feel sorry for him at all. I tipped off a local cop I knew from high school, told him to keep an eye out for Julian. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed. Julian had been arrested for a DUI. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. The next evening, I walked past a coffee shop downtown and caught a glimpse of someone inside. Maddie. She was sitting alone, stirring a cup of tea, her shoulders hunched, her eyes distant. I hadn't seen her since I had left her standing outside that bank, desperate and broken. A part of me had expected her to leave town. Maybe run back to her parents, start over somewhere new. But no, she was still here. She looked different. Not just tired, but smaller somehow, like she had lost more than just money and security. For a brief moment, I felt something unfamiliar. Guilt. Had I gone too far? She had hurt me, betrayed me, torn my life apart. But I had made sure she suffered for it. Maybe I had made her suffer too much. I shook the thought away and turned to leave. But then, as if sensing me, she looked up. Our eyes locked. Her lips parted, and for a second, she looked like she might cry. She pushed her chair back and stood, hesitating before making her way toward the door. I could have left. I should have left. But I didn't. She stopped a few feet away from me, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. "Eric," she said softly. I nodded but said nothing. She took a deep breath. I need to say this. I know you probably don't care, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but—" Her voice wavered. She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." I exhaled slowly, my chest tightening. I had dreamed of hearing those words. Of Maddie standing before me, wrecked and regretful, realizing what she had lost. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel the way I thought it would. I just felt tired. She searched my face, waiting for me to say something. So I did. "You made your choice, Maddie," I said quietly. "You chose him. You left. You took everything. And now you're sorry." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Why?" I asked. "Because it didn't work out? Because he wasn't who you thought he was? Or because you finally realized what you threw away?" She flinched, and I knew I had hit the truth. She had thought Julian would be her ticket to a better life. And when I took that away from her, she had nothing left. I sighed. "I don't hate you, Maddie." Her breath caught. "You don't." I shook my head. "I did. For a long time. But now—" I shrugged. "I don't feel anything for you at all." Her face crumpled. She nodded quickly, as if trying to accept it, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "Goodbye, Maddie." And this time, I was the one who walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Not happy. Not at peace. But like a weight had been lifted off my chest. Revenge had consumed me. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to define me. I still had a life to rebuild. And I was finally ready to start. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I had spent so much time plotting, destroying, burning everything to the ground, that I hadn't thought about what came after. What was I supposed to do now? The thought should have excited me. A clean slate. A fresh start. Instead, it terrified me. Revenge had given me purpose. But now that it was over, I felt adrift. I went back to work, trying to bury myself in routine. Big West Auto had been patient with me through my downward spiral, but I knew I had pushed my luck. Isabella was waiting for me when I walked in. She leaned against the doorway of my usual repair bay, arms crossed. "You look like a man who just crawled out of hell," she said, arching an eyebrow. I sighed, running a hand down my face. "Feels about right." She studied me for a long moment. "You done?" I frowned. "Done with what?" She tilted her head. "With whatever mess you've been drowning in." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her I was moving forward, leaving it all behind. But the truth was, I didn't know how. Instead of answering, I just shrugged and got to work. That night, I found myself in the garage long after closing. I stood in front of a half-repaired truck, staring at the exposed engine like it held the answers I couldn't find anywhere else. My hands knew what to do. They moved on instinct, twisting bolts, tightening belts, fixing what was broken. If only everything else in my life was that simple. At some point, Isabella walked in, leaning against the tool chest. She didn't say anything for a while, just watched as I worked. Finally, she sighed. "You know, Eric, you don't have to punish yourself forever." I kept my eyes on the engine. "Who says I am?" She let out a humorless laugh. "Come on. You think I don't know what revenge looks like? I've seen that look before. You went after someone. Hard. And now you don't know how to come back from it." I tightened a bolt and exhaled. "I did what I had to do." She nodded. "Sure. And did it fix anything?" I clenched my jaw. "It made them pay." Isabella sighed, shaking her head. "Yeah, but did it fix you?" I didn't have an answer for that. She pushed off the tool chest and patted my shoulder as she walked away. "Think about it." I did. All night. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. For months, I had been focused on tearing things apart. Maybe it was time to start building something instead. I thought about all the years I had spent saving, working towards something bigger. Maddie had stolen our future, but that didn't mean I couldn't build my own. The idea hit me so suddenly, I almost laughed. What if I opened my own shop? The thought of running my own business had always felt impossible before. Too risky. Too expensive. But after everything I had been through, what did I really have to lose? I called Ryan. When he picked up, he sounded surprised. You do realize it's 7 in the morning, right? I have an idea, I said, ignoring his groggy irritation. He yawned. This should be good. I want to open my own shop. Silence. Then, okay. Didn't see that coming. I sat up, rubbing my face. I've been working on cars my whole life. I know this business inside and out. And for years, I kept making excuses. But now I have nothing holding me back. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Eric, that's actually a great idea. I exhaled, tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying slowly unwinding. I think so too. I spent the next few weeks figuring out the details. I reached out to old clients, people who had trusted my work for years. The response was better than I expected. People were excited. They had always known me as the guy who could fix anything. Now, they wanted to see what I could build. Isabella, to my surprise, was supportive. If anyone can make this work, it's you, she said, handing me a list of potential locations. Just don't screw it up. I smirked. No promises. I found a small garage on the outskirts of town. It needed work, but so did I. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. The day I officially opened Lawson Custom Auto, I expected to feel nervous. Instead, I felt free. I stood outside the shop, looking at the freshly painted sign above the doors, and let out a slow breath. I had spent so long destroying the past, I had forgotten what it felt like to build a future. Now, I had one, and I wasn't going to waste it. As I walked inside, the bell on the door jingled. My first customer had arrived. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't payback. But it was something real. And that was enough. The shop was quiet that evening, the hum of the cooling engines filling the space like a steady heartbeat. I leaned against the workbench, a wrench still in my hand, watching the last of the sunlight spill through the open garage doors. For months, I had lived with rage. It had driven me, consumed me, become me. But now, standing here in the shop I had built from nothing, it felt different. I had spent so much time burning my past, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward. The shop had been open for almost 3 months now, and word had spread fast. Old clients, new customers, people who had known me for years, they all came. Not just because they needed repairs, but because they trusted me. That trust had been hard-earned, and I wasn't going to waste it. I worked long hours, lost myself in the rhythm of fixing things. There was something therapeutic about it, taking something broken and making it whole again. Maybe, in a way, that's what I was doing to myself too. One evening, Ryan showed up. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me work. So, this is what healing looks like, huh? I smirked. Not bad, right? He chuckled. Not bad at all. There was a pause, then he said, you look lighter, happier. I exhaled, running a hand down my face. I think I am. For so long, I had let anger define me. I had built my life around revenge, bitterness, pain. And now? Now, I was just living. Ryan nodded. I'm glad, man. You deserve this. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. Maddie showed up 2 weeks later. It was late, almost closing time, when I heard the bell over the door. I turned, expecting a customer. But instead, it was her. She looked different. Tired. Smaller. Like the weight of everything had finally settled on her shoulders. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she swallowed hard and said, Can we talk? I should have said no. But instead, I nodded toward the back. Not here. We walked outside, the night air crisp around us. She hugged herself, like she was trying to hold herself together. She took a deep breath. I saw the shop. I heard you opened your own place. I nodded. Yeah. Her lips pressed together. I never thought you'd do something like this. I let out a breath. Neither did I. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Regret? Sadness? I made a mistake, she whispered. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel the sharp sting I once would have. Instead, I just let out a small, humorless chuckle. You made a choice, Maddie. She bit her lip. I didn't mean to hurt you, Eric. I thought I wanted something else. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see the woman who had betrayed me. I didn't see the woman who had destroyed me. I just saw a person who had made a choice. A bad one. And it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she whispered. Not because I want something from you. Just because. I needed to say it. I nodded, my jaw tightening. For so long, I had wanted to hear those words. And now that I had, they didn't matter anymore. I looked at her one last time, then turned toward the shop. Goodbye, Maddie. She blinked, like she had been expecting something else. A fight. A second chance. But there was nothing left to say. I walked inside and closed the door behind me. Life moved on. The shop grew busier. I hired a couple of guys to help with the workload. I started sleeping better, waking up without feeling like there was something heavy sitting on my chest. I didn't think about Maddie much anymore. And Julian? He was still tangled in legal battles, a shell of the man he used to be. I had heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had tried to rebuild, tried to start over somewhere new. But his name was ruined. His career was over. And for the first time, I didn't care. Not because I wanted to hurt him more, but because he just didn't matter anymore. One evening, Isabella stopped by. She folded her arms and looked around the shop. Not bad, Lawson. Thanks, I said, smirking. Coming from you, that's practically a glowing review. She rolled her eyes. Don't get cocky. Then, more seriously, she added, you did good. Something in her tone made me pause. You were worried about me, huh? She shrugged. I've seen guys like you. Guys who get stuck in the past. I'm just glad you didn't let it swallow you. I thought about that. About how close I had come. Then I nodded. Yeah, me too. She smirked. So, since you're all stable now, you finally gonna ask me out for a drink or what? I blinked. Is that your way of asking me? She grinned. I don't waste time. I laughed, shaking my head. All right, Reed. One drink. She grinned. Better make it a good one. And for the first time in months, I looked forward to something that wasn't revenge. A year later, things were different. The shop was thriving. I had a solid team, loyal customers, a life that I had built from nothing. And I was happy. Not because I had one. Not because I had destroyed the people who had hurt me. But because I had finally let go. I still thought about the past sometimes. But it didn't control me anymore. And that was the real victory.